Have you ever had a moment where something at work didn't feel right, but you couldn't explain why? That's how my story begins. And honestly, I wish I had trusted that feeling sooner. For months, little things kept slipping through the cracks, things I never used to struggle with. A report would go missing right before a meeting. An email I knew I sent somehow never arrived. A client would reference something I supposedly promised, even though it was nowhere in my notes. At first, I blamed myself. I told myself I was tired, overwhelmed, or maybe just losing focus. But deep down, something inside me felt unsettled, like I was walking into work with a quiet weight on my shoulders, unsure of what would go wrong next. And every time my boss looked disappointed, my heart would sink a little more. I kept thinking, is it me? Am I failing? And honestly, that question started to follow me home, into my evenings, and even into my sleep. I had no idea someone was quietly working against me. I just felt this slow creeping sense that I was slipping, and I didn't understand why. It wasn't one big moment that opened my eyes. It was a series of tiny cracks that finally formed a pattern. One morning, my boss called me into his office with a worried expression. He slid a stack of printed emails toward me, messages I supposedly sent to a client, promising things I never would have agreed to. My heart dropped. The writing looked like mine. The tone was close, but something felt off. I walked out of that meeting with my stomach in knots. I kept replaying everything in my mind, every task, every conversation. Something wasn't adding up. And then I noticed something small but strange. My coworker, Mark, watching me a little too closely. He always seemed to pop up when something went wrong. He always had something helpful to add when the boss questioned me. And there was this quiet smirk he tried to hide whenever I looked stressed. Still, I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to assume the worst about someone I worked beside every day. But the feeling wouldn't leave me. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I whispered to myself, what if someone is doing this on purpose? And for the first time, that idea didn't feel impossible once. The thought settled that someone might actually be trying to harm my reputation. I felt this mix of fear and determination. I needed clarity. I needed truth. And the only way to get it was to pay attention to the smallest details, the things I normally walked right past. So I started observing. I noticed that whenever I stepped away from my desk, even for a minute, Mark would casually drift over to my workstation. He'd pretend to borrow a stapler or ask a passing question, but his eyes always lingered on my screen. I also noticed how often he accidentally received emails intended for me, things he had no reason to be copied on. Quietly, I created a private folder on my computer and began collecting everything: timestamps, forwarded messages, screenshots, even notes about strange interactions. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. I just needed to understand what was happening to me. Then came the moment that made everything real. I walked back into the office after lunch and saw Mark standing at my desk with my computer unlocked. He froze when he saw me, and for a brief second, his expression wasn't guilt. It was frustration, like I'd interrupted something important. That was when my heart sank. I wasn't imagining this. Someone I worked beside every day truly was trying to tear me down. The moment I caught Mark at my desk, something inside me shifted. I didn't confront him, not yet. I simply asked as calmly as I could, "Everything okay?" He mumbled something about checking a file, then walked away quickly, almost too quickly. My hands were still trembling long after he left. Later that week, my manager called me in for an urgent meeting. The tone worried me. I sat across from her as she slid a printed report onto the table, my work, except half the numbers had been mysteriously changed. Not just small mistakes, changes that made me look careless. She asked if I had any explanation. I didn't, not yet. All I knew was that someone had tampered with it. That night, I stayed late to check the activity logs on my computer. My stomach tightened when I saw the access history. Someone had logged into my account while I was away, and the time matched exactly when I saw Mark standing at my desk. The truth was no longer hidden. The person I had trusted, collaborated with, even helped on assignments, had been quietly undermining me for weeks. It hurt deeply, but it also gave me something new: clarity. And clarity can be powerful once the truth settled in. The disappointment turned into something calmer: resolve. I didn't want to hurt Mark, and I didn't want revenge. What I wanted was proof, and my dignity back. I realized that reacting impulsively would only make me look defensive or unreliable, and I refused to give him that power. So I took a quiet, careful approach. I started by protecting my work. I changed my passwords, added two-step verification, and began saving everything to a separate private folder. But the real plan came when I remembered a feature our software had: automatic version tracking. Every edit, every login, every file change was recorded with a name and timestamp. So I created a new project report, one that looked complete but had a few purposeful placeholders. Nothing harmful, nothing misleading, just enough to see what he would try to alter. Then I waited. Every day felt heavier than the last. I kept reminding myself that I wasn't trying to get anyone fired. I only needed the truth to speak for itself. And deep down, it hurt that someone I had once trusted had pushed me to take such careful measures. But I knew this was the only way forward, and soon the trap was set. After a few days of careful observation, the moment I had been preparing for finally arrived. I noticed unusual activity on my project files. Mark had accessed the placeholders I had set up. My heart sank at first, not out of anger, but a deep, sad disbelief. I had trusted him as a colleague, shared ideas, collaborated on reports. And now, seeing him cross that line, the reality hit me harder than I expected. I reviewed the tracked changes quietly, step by step. The evidence was there. He had attempted to manipulate and sabotage the project. Every edit, every attempted shortcut clearly documented in the system. I felt a mix of emotions: betrayal, sadness, and surprisingly, a sense of relief. Relief because I finally had clarity. I had feared suspicions would remain doubts forever, but the truth was undeniable. It wasn't just about being right. It was about understanding who I could truly trust and who I couldn't. And while part of me wished things were different, another part knew that this discovery was necessary for my growth, both personally and professionally. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of empowerment and sorrow. The trap had worked. The truth was finally in my hands. With the truth now clear, I had to decide what to do next. It wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about taking control of my own life and professional integrity. I documented everything carefully and shared it with my supervisor. I explained the situation calmly, focusing on facts rather than emotion. It was difficult to remain composed, but I knew this was the right approach. Mark faced the consequences. But what struck me more profoundly was how I felt afterward. The anger and betrayal gradually softened into clarity and strength. I realized that holding on to resentment would only weigh me down. Instead, I chose to focus on my growth, my goals, and my own work. I began setting firmer boundaries, communicating more openly, and trusting my instincts without letting fear control me. Life at work slowly returned to normal, but I carried the lessons learned. Trust is precious and must be earned. Vigilance doesn't mean paranoia, it means self-respect. And most importantly, even in the face of betrayal, you can choose dignity, patience, and empowerment over bitterness. If you were in my place, would you have handled it differently? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear your perspective.